Late night glow on silent screens. Another story in between. Coffee cold, fingers fly beneath a vast, watchful sky.
Good evening, this is Lydia Dela Cruz reporting from Manila on this Bonifacio Day, a date that honors the revolutionary spirit of the Filipino people. The nation is once again witnessing a surge of civic action today. At least 86 Catholic dioceses across the Philippines have declared their support for massive anti-corruption rallies calling for truth, accountability, and transparency in government spending. The Catholic Church, long regarded as a moral compass in Philippine society, has stepped forward with a unified voice. Bishops and parish leaders from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao have urged their communities to join the demonstrations, peacefully emphasizing that the fight against corruption is not merely political, it is a moral and spiritual duty. This nationwide support underscores the scale of public frustration. The rallies, known as the Trillion Peso March and Bahasa Luneta 2.0, are fueled by allegations of ghost flood control projects, where billions of pesos were reportedly siphoned off by officials and contractors. By aligning with the protesters, the dioceses are signaling that corruption is not just a governance issue, it is a betrayal of the people's trust and dignity. Across parishes today, priests delivered homilies urging the faithful to stand firm against dishonesty. In Quezon City, banners carried by parish groups read, "Expose the criminals, return the people's money, jail the corrupt" at Rizal Park. Church choirs sang hymns alongside protest chants, blending spirituality with civic action. Observers note that this convergence of faith and activism recalls earlier moments in Philippine history, when the church played a pivotal role in movements for justice and democracy. The symbolism is powerful. On Bonifacio Day, citizens are not only remembering a revolutionary hero, but also embodying his spirit by demanding integrity from today's leaders. While the government has deployed thousands of police officers to maintain order, church leaders stress that these rallies are not about overthrowing institutions, but about strengthening them through accountability. As one bishop declared, "We march not to divide, but to heal our nation from the wounds of corruption." On this Bonifacio Day, two historic landmarks in Metro Manila have become the beating heart of nationwide protests. The EDSA People Power Monument in Quezon City and Rizal Park, or Luneta in Manila, are hosting parallel demonstrations. The Trillion Peso March and Bahasa Luneta 2.0 each carrying its own symbolism, but united in one demand: accountability in government. At the EDSA People Power Monument, thousands have gathered under the shadow of history. This site, forever linked to the 1986 revolution that toppled a dictatorship, now serves as the stage for the Trillion Peso March. Protesters here are invoking the spirit of people power, reminding leaders that corruption erodes democracy just as surely as authoritarian rule. The monument's towering figures of ordinary Filipinos frozen in bronze are mirrored today by living citizens holding placards and chanting slogans. Organizers say the choice of EDSA is deliberate. It is a call to remember that collective action can bring about change and that the people's voice remains the strongest safeguard against abuse of power. Meanwhile, at Rizal Park in Manila, the Bahasa Luneta 2.0 rally is unfolding. Luneta, a place of national pride where Jose Rizal was executed, has long been a gathering ground for civic movements. Today it is flooded not by water but by citizens demanding transparency in flood control projects now tainted by allegations of ghost contracts and missing billions. The symbolism here is striking. Rizal, who gave his life for truth and freedom, is honored by citizens who refuse to accept deception in public service. Families, students, and workers have come together, some carrying effigies and masks of political leaders, others waving banners that read, "Return the people's money." The atmosphere is both solemn and defiant, blending cultural heritage with civic outrage. Adding to the visual impact are protesters wearing masks depicting President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and Vice President Sara Duterte. Organizers say the masks symbolize accountability, putting faces to the allegations of corruption and kickbacks tied to infrastructure projects. For many demonstrators, the masks are not acts of hostility, but of symbolism, reminders that leaders must answer to the people. The imagery is striking. Rows of masked protesters chanting in unison, their voices echoing through historic landmarks. Some carry effigies, others wave placards with bold demands. The combination of numbers, symbols, and slogans creates a spectacle that is both theatrical and deeply political, capturing the nation's attention and sending a clear message to those in power. At the heart of today's massive demonstrations lies a scandal that has shaken public trust. Revelations of so-called ghost flood control projects. These projects meant to protect communities from devastating floods allegedly exist only on paper. Billions of pesos, according to whistleblowers and investigative reports, were pocketed by officials, lawmakers, and contractors instead of being used to safeguard lives and property. Flood control projects are critical in a country like the Philippines, where typhoons and monsoon rains regularly threaten homes and livelihoods. Yet documents reveal that many of these projects were never built. Despite funds being released, contractors allegedly filed false reports, lawmakers signed off on budgets, and officials approved payments, all for infrastructure that never materialized. For ordinary Filipinos, the betrayal is staggering. Not only were billions of pesos stolen, but communities remain vulnerable to floods that could have been prevented. Protesters say this scandal is not just about missing money. It is about lives put at risk, families displaced, and trust in government shattered. Today's rallies channel that anger into collective action. Protesters carry placards showing submerged houses, symbolizing the floods that continue to devastate communities. Others chant slogans, demanding the return of stolen funds and the imprisonment of those responsible. The symbolism is powerful. On Bonifacio Day, a day honoring a revolutionary hero, citizens are rising against what they see as a betrayal of the nation's future. The anger is not abstract. It is rooted in the lived experiences of families who have seen floodwaters destroy their homes, while billions meant for protection vanished into corruption. As one protester declared, every peso stolen from flood control is a life put in danger. That sentiment captures the root of today's demonstrations. The outrage is not only about corruption in the abstract, but about the tangible consequences of neglect and greed. We now turn to Silvania Bustros for continuing coverage.
Good evening, this is Silvania Butros reporting. As tens of thousands of Filipinos take to the streets in protest, the government has moved swiftly to ensure peace and order. The Philippine National Police, or PNP, has deployed more than 15,000 officers across Metro Manila and placed the capital on full alert. Authorities say the measure is designed to safeguard both demonstrators and the public, while preventing any outbreak of violence. Police units have been stationed at key protest sites, including the EDSA People Power Monument in Quezon City and Rizal Park in Manila. Officers are positioned along major roads, intersections, and transport hubs to manage traffic and crowd flow. Mobile command centers have been set up to monitor developments in real time, while rapid response teams stand ready should tensions escalate. The PNP emphasizes that their role is not to suppress dissent, but to maintain order and protect citizens. Officials have reminded protesters to remain peaceful, noting that freedom of assembly is a constitutional right. At the same time, they warn that any attempts to incite violence or disrupt public safety will be met with firm but lawful action. The heavy police presence has created a complex atmosphere. On one hand, many demonstrators say they feel reassured, believing officers will help prevent clashes and keep the rallies safe. On the other, some activists express concern that the deployment could intimidate participants or discourage others from joining. Observers note that the government's response reflects both caution and sensitivity. With allegations of corruption fueling public anger, officials are keenly aware that any misstep in handling the protests could deepen mistrust. By placing Metro Manila on full alert, the administration signals that it is treating the demonstrations as a matter of national significance, balancing security with respect for democratic freedoms. As tens of thousands of Filipinos march in protest today, the Catholic Church has made its position clear. Religious leaders emphasize that these rallies are not about demanding President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s resignation, nor about installing a junta. Instead, they stress that the demonstrations are about holding corrupt actors accountable within the framework of democratic institutions. From pulpits across the archipelago, bishops and priests have reminded the faithful that the Church's support for the rallies is rooted in moral conviction, not partisan politics. They argue that corruption is a sin against both God and the people, and that accountability must be pursued through lawful, democratic means. By distancing themselves from calls for regime change, religious leaders are underscoring a vital point. The protests are not about destabilizing government, but about strengthening it. They insist that democracy is best served when institutions are purified of corruption, not bypassed or dismantled. In homilies delivered today, priests urged parishioners to march peacefully, carrying the message of truth and justice. One bishop declared, "We march not to divide, but to heal our nation from the wounds of corruption." This sentiment reflects the Church's broader stance that civic action must be constructive, rooted in unity, and aimed at reform rather than chaos. At protest sites, parish groups carried banners that read "Accountability within democracy and faith demands truth." Choirs sang hymns alongside chants, blending spirituality with civic activism. The Church's presence has lent the rallies a moral weight, reminding both protesters and officials that the fight against corruption is not only political, but deeply ethical. While today's massive demonstrations are broadly framed around accountability and transparency, a number of groups have taken a sharper stance. These counter-movements are explicitly calling for President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. to resign, citing allegations of kickbacks from infrastructure projects as proof of systemic corruption at the highest levels. Organizers of these factions argue that corruption cannot be addressed without leadership change. They claim that billions of pesos tied to flood control and infrastructure projects were funneled into private pockets, implicating not only contractors and lawmakers but also the highest offices of government. For these groups, resignation is the only acceptable outcome, and they are using today's rallies to amplify that demand. Placards at Rizal Park and EDSA bear slogans such as "Marcos resign now" and "Kickbacks kill democracy." Protesters wearing masks of the president and vice president say the imagery is meant to hold leaders personally accountable for the scandal. Their chants are louder, more confrontational, and aimed directly at the palace. This counter-movement has created a noticeable tension within the broader demonstrations. While the Catholic Church and many civic groups emphasize reform within democratic institutions, these factions insist that corruption at the top makes reform impossible. Analysts warn that this divergence could fracture the unity of the protests, with some participants wary of being associated with calls for regime change. Authorities are closely monitoring these groups, concerned that their more aggressive rhetoric could spark confrontations. Yet, for the counter-movements, the risk is worth it. They argue that history has shown resignation demands to be a legitimate form of protest, pointing to past moments when public pressure forced leaders to step down. We now return to Lydia de la Cruz.
While the government has deployed thousands of police officers to maintain order, church leaders stress that these rallies are not about overthrowing institutions, but about strengthening them through accountability. As one bishop declared, "We march not to divide, but to heal our nation from the wounds of corruption." From the pulpit to the pavement, the message is clear. The call for truth and transparency is echoing across the archipelago, carried by faith, conviction, and the collective will of the Filipino people. This is Lydia de la Cruz, reporting for National Broadcast. Together, EDSA and Luneta form twin epicenters of protest, two landmarks tied to the nation's struggle for freedom and justice, now re-energized by a new generation of Filipinos, whether invoking the memory of people power or the sacrifice of Rizal. The message is clear. Corruption is not just a political issue. It is a betrayal of the nation's soul. From Quezon City to Manila, the call for accountability echoes across the archipelago. This is Lydia de la Cruz, reporting live on today's historic demonstrations. From the sheer size of the crowds to the powerful symbolism of masks and banners, today's protests are more than just gatherings. They are statements of collective will. Tens of thousands of Filipinos have chosen to march not in anger alone, but in determination to reclaim integrity in public service. As one protester told us, "We are here because corruption robs us of our future." We march so our children may inherit a nation built on truth. As one protester declared, every peso stolen from flood control is a life put in danger. That sentiment captures the root of today's demonstrations. The outrage is not only about corruption in the abstract, but about the tangible consequences of neglect and greed, from ghost projects to real floods. The people's anger is both moral and practical, and today it has spilled into the streets in a demand for justice. As the rallies continue, the government's challenge is clear: to uphold peace without undermining the people's right to protest. With more than 15,000 officers on the ground, Metro Manila is under watchful eyes tonight. Whether this response will be remembered as protective or heavy-handed depends on how the hours ahead unfold. As the demonstrations continue, the church's stance provides a stabilizing voice. By affirming that the rallies are about accountability, not overthrow, religious leaders are guiding the movement toward peaceful democratic reform in a nation where faith and civic life are deeply intertwined. This message resonates powerfully. Corruption must be confronted, but always within the bounds of democracy. As the day unfolds, the counter-movements add a sharper edge to the nationwide rallies. Their message is clear: accountability must begin at the very top, and resignation is the only path forward. Whether these demands gain traction or remain a minority voice within the broader call for reform will shape how today's protests are remembered. This is Lydia Dela Cruz reporting live on the counter. Currents of dissent flowing through the nation's demonstrations. God bless and be safe.
Late night glow on silent screens.